Welcome, bird nerds. Welcome, friends. I'm Grant Williams. This is the Bird Emergency, where I get the opportunity to talk to people who know far more about birds than I do. I'm just a humble bird nerd. And today it's my pleasure to get to know Dr. Sally Bryant is in Tasmania and has a wealth of experience. Before I introduce you, Sally, I'll just step through it a little bit so the listeners can know that they should be paying attention. They should be paying attention and taking some notes. Sally, you did your PhD in the School of Zoology and before that, Bachelor of Science. So you are a scientist. 11 years as the Manager of Conservation Science and Planning at Tasmanian Land Conservancy, and we'll talk about what Tasmanian Land Conservancy is for those who don't know. You've been the Director of Go Wild Tasmania, Bonnyrong Wildlife Centre. I think people will know that name. And 5 years as the Manager of Threatened Species Section at the Department of, let's shorthand it, Department of Conservation and Environment in the Tasmanian Government, and you're also the manager of the fauna section before that. Currently, Honorary Research Fellow, Tasmanian Land Conservancy, Honorary Editor of the Royal Society of Tasmania. Now, that's a big tick. The Royal Society is a bit of a big deal, I'm told. Island Arts Symposium. This is the really interesting thing about how important islands are. And is still the chair of the Forty-spotted Pardalote National Recovery Team. I think that's enough. Hello, Sally. How are you? How do you wear all those hats?
With pride, Grant, with pride. And there's still more to come.
How do I phrase this? I think I've often talked in the show about how you have to stand on the shoulders of giants to keep achieving things in the conservation and ecology space because you're building on prior knowledge. But knowledge in this area takes a long time to collect, assess, and then disseminate. So you need to have stickability, as my old school principal used to call it. You really need stickability to be able to make an impact. And you've certainly done that. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention, Tasmanian listeners will know you because you've spent the best part of 20 years doing a regular spot on ABC radio talking about wildlife and no doubt often about the threatened species of Tasmania. Has it been hard sticking at it?
I'm tired. I'm exhausted.
I'm sorry I've worn you out already. How did you get – let's start with that experience with the ABC. How did that come about, and what was the feedback that you got over that 20 years from the audience?
It started back in the 90s, Grant. I had co-authored a book called The Threatened Fauna Handbook, and we got some media publicity on the radio for that, and people started to ring in and answer questions. And I guess my professional scope for fauna, which included birds, reptiles, the whole spectrum of species that occurred in Tasmania, made it a good fit for general knowledge questions. So that's how it started, and it became a regular segment. It's still a fortnightly segment. It started off on breakfasts, then mornings. Now it's still running in the afternoons with Helen Shield, and I really love that time slot, and I love her style. And I think the success of the program, Grant, is not so much me or my response to questions, but the fact that most people are so fascinated by wildlife and want to know more. So it's continued on for a long time and hopefully for more to come.
There's a really good point to pick up because it's one of the things that I tend to get a bit bolshy about it. And I think I've mentioned this saying to you once before, but you said that people really care about wildlife. I think we're at the point where it's really nice that you care. Now, what are you going to do about it? So do you find that while everyone's interested and they like to know about the wildlife around them, do you think there's any more people who are going to actually take action and demand protection than there was 20 years ago? Bearing in mind that Tasmania has always been quite a environmentally conscious and activist population, maybe not in the majority, but a significant proportion because of the Greens movement in Australia really started in Tasmania. We all know about Bob Brown, and I think we know about the Franklin Dam. So do you think that has grown in, let's say, 20 years?
I think it's definitely grown in 20 years. Tasmania is a great case study for the growth in the conservation understanding and the love for the environment. But Tasmania's changed, and it's changing dramatically. And in those 20 years, we've gone from being the small backwater state to the most highly sought after place for people to come and live and enjoy nature, experience nature tourism. So it's rapidly transformed in 20 years. We've had a whole cultural shift and a change in how we see ourselves and how we see our state. Education, Grant, is a fundamental platform. I often think that for conservation, protecting habitat is a fundamental plank, and education is a fundamental platform. But we have to go above and beyond education. And I think your point about, are there more people that care? Yes, there's more people that care, but are they stepping up and doing and translating that care into positive action? I'd like to think yes, but is it fast enough or significant enough? I'm not sure. Obviously not if you look at the stats for conservation and species decline.
No, and look, I hadn't really planned to go down this route, but I think it's really interesting to talk to you because you have been a communicator in the general sense, getting out, talking to the general public rather than just talking to the, I don't know, I hate using the term. It's really easy to group people together like the intelligentsia, the wildlife, the ecology, the biology club, so to speak. Do you think there's actually an awareness of how bad, how dire the situation is for some of these icon species?
One of the major lessons I've learned through the Wildlife Talkback grant is burnout and turn off by people that see conservation as continually a bad news story and loss of hope. It's always about death and destruction. I used to laugh when I managed threatened species for the state government. It was always about death and destruction and loss. So I think people do become very worn and bitter, and sometimes what you need are a few good news stories. The success of the Wildlife Talkback is keeping that talkback positive, so that people stay engaged, but trying to drop into the message some little gems about things you can do and changes you can make. And at the end of the day, what's transforming conservation consciousness is climate change, because we've now moved into an era where we are thinking about large-scale impacts that 20, 30 years ago weren't on our radar, but now they are. And so people are a little bit more tuned in to some of the threats that are occurring at a much more rapid rate.
Let's try and stay positive, because sometimes I do get a bit doom and gloom, because I want everyone to hit the panic button, not to be saying that everything's bad, but that we actually have to take action on the things that we know need to be done. So give me a couple of glimmers of hope about your patch in Tasmania. What are some of the positive steps that have been taken that have got real successful outcomes that we can point to and measure?
The private land sector. My time with the Tasmanian Land Conservancy, when I managed the science program, and I'm still a research fellow there and very strongly connected to that organisation. If you want a good news story and you want hope that in Tasmania there are organisations supported by people both on the ground, volunteers, philanthropists, backers, through smart business, that are making positive and significant changes to the state of the environment in Tasmania. Look in the private sector, look in the private conservation sector. All over Australia, the growth of the private conservation sector has set a new standard and shown government what is possible. That gives me hope.
For people who are not familiar with how the private conservation sector works. Are you happy to talk about the Tasmanian Land Conservancy and what it is, how it operates, and I don't know, is it superior than the traditional government state park, national park model?
People can get onto the website of the Tasmanian Land Conservancy grant and have a look at their latest annual report. So this little snapshot doesn't disclose anything that's not publicly available, but I think the Tasmanian Land Conservancy is a model that demonstrates how innovation, quick thinking, and looking at priorities and dealing with urgent action can actually transform into results, because the Tasmanian Land Conservancy was created in 2001, so they've only been around for 20 odd years. They've grown from a small organisation of a handful of volunteers and one or two staff to now being over 20 odd staff. The smart, savvy business model that they have means they're sustainable into the future. They have a business model that is based on a foundation fund, and in 20 years, Grant, they've established now over $16 million in a capital fund that allows them to run the organisation and to grow the organisation. They have held campaigns for the acquisition of land, and this is often private land that adjoins public reserves, that acts as a corridor or a buffer, or it holds threatened species that are otherwise not in public reserves. So their private land reserve system, which is now permanently protected by covenant, I think is about 25 reserves, stems 20,000 or more hectares. So that's pretty impressive stuff, and it's done in collaboration with other partners, but it's also pure leadership and innovation.
Now, with that significant amount of land being added to, we can't call it the national estate because it's not, is it?
And in fact, some of the reserves of the Tasmanian Land Conservancy grant have World Heritage status. They're not small reserves. These are significant parcels of land.
Yeah. All right. Let me pose a question and invite you to give some opinion. The three of the top four birds most likely to go extinct in Australia are Tasmanian, and not one of them is one of the species that we all know about or that frequently discussed: the swift parrot, the OBP, the orange-bellied parrot, and the 40-spotted Pardalote. The top three are the King Island black currawong, the King Island scrub tit, and the King Island brown thornbill. Without some form of action involving private conservation organisations and practices, do you think that the top three and the others that we know about, the sort of Tasmanian icon species, have got a hope if they were only going to rely on public land acquisitions and protection?
Let's talk about King Island. King Island has undergone massive land clearance, Grant. Anyone can look at a map of native habitat on King Island and you'll see that the majority of King Island is pasture, and that happened a long time ago. The King Island thornbill, the King Island scrub tit really reflected the spiral decline of very restricted species that continue to just plummet towards extinction. It's a miracle that we still have both of those species left on King Island. Now, while I'm demonstrating that the rise in private land conservation has demonstrated leadership and innovation, they can't do it alone. It is all about partnership. And the biggest kid on the block is the government. The biggest bankroll is the government. And as impressive as the Foundation Fund is for the Tasmanian Land Conservancy, it is the Tasmanian government and the Commonwealth government that can change species conservation overnight. But government is such a fraught mechanism. It's not proactive and it's not quick to react unless there's a dire emergency. by which case it's often too late, and throwing money at it is not going to bring about recovery or stop extinction. We really do need a new conversation about how we tackle environment, because it's so obvious that what we are doing is not enough, it's not fast enough, and it is not working. So there's definitely time for a new conversation.
That's one of the key things I wanted to talk to you about, Sally, because you've played in both sandpits. You've been a long-time employee and manager in the Department of Conservation / Environment / had they merged forestry and agriculture into it when you were managing it? I mean, and now being a manager and an advisor to a private group, do you think that the government side is ready for a new conversation and a new way of doing things, or are they a fair way behind?
Oh, they're a long way behind. And when I say government, Grant, I have to pay respect to the people in government. Still, some of my original colleagues. Government in Tasmania has some great staff committed to conservation, but it is the structure of government, it's the mechanism of government that is slow and not responsive. It's not proactive. So that's what we're talking about. Are they ready for a conversation? No, in Tasmania they're not. They definitely don't want a conversation. Coming from government and working there for many years, your mindset changes. You feel like you have control. You feel like your decisions are the right decisions. And it's not until you get out of government, you work in the private sector, a whole new perspective opens up. And for me, it was such a window of change. And that's where working together, and the Forty-spotted Pardalote Recovery Program demonstrates that so well. Working together, you can achieve so much more. Government is not the mechanism to do that. And if I hark back to the conversation we started with on education, research, data, we know about the perils that face nature. We can continue the research and add the finer detail and finer points. We know most of what we need to know to prevent extinctions. Is that
Sorry, it's not somebody knocking at my door. That's the dog barking at the resident turtle doves.
Dog useful in conservation. Dogs have risen to the fore.
That's right. No, he gets very annoyed when they come and sit on the roof or on the fence or in the kumquat tree. So he doesn't like them coming around. He does have a job to do. But returning to that issue about government, and when I'm using the term government, I'm separating out all the foot soldiers who are actually employed in the department, collecting data, assessing surveys, writing the reports, building the fences, maintaining the tracks and the roads. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the decision makers and the people apportioning resources, be they elected politicians or the high-ranking advisors and managers. Are they, how do I say this without being offensive, do you think they're good faith actors when it comes to conservation? We know what species need to be protected. I might have to let him inside in a minute if he keeps going. Do you think we already know what the problems are? In most cases, we know what needs to be done to do protection, at least to ensure survival. We might not know how to grow the populations, but we might be able to stop them reducing. But when push comes to shove, if there's a positive economic imperative somewhere to not do what's right, do you think the absolute decision makers really value wildlife? Sorry if that's too tough. I know it's complex. I'm really interested in your opinion, because you've been on both sides of the fence.
I think it'd be fair to say, Grant, that in politics, the environment minister is not high in the pecking order. Whoever is selected as someone to look after the environment portfolio is often not the strongest politician in the group. If you look at the big portfolios, it's health, it's education, it's finance, it's business. If you're given the environment portfolio, it's a little bit of a poison chalice, I'd say. And isn't that a sad indictment on a system that distributes funding and allocates priorities for work where the environment isn't seen as a top priority? I think that probably captures the fact that we're in a dire situation.
Yes, let me make you bigger than me. I don't want to be. Oh, why isn't that working? Let's just go on from there. I think your answer highlights the thoughts I have, in that even if you get a hero for the environment to be the minister for that portfolio, the party structure and parties as a whole still don't value the environment above economic portfolios. I think you mentioned the big ones: finance, health, of course, is the social services one. I mean, nothing's bigger than the spending on health and on Centrelink, etc. Yeah, roads, infrastructure. And I'm not naive that you need to have economic drivers, but we do know how to do a lot of these things hand in hand, but they still don't seem to be done. Is that frustrating for you, Sally, having written lots of reports about what needs to be done and put in very clear pathways for success? We'll talk about the 40 spot in a bit more detail in a few minutes, but do you get frustrated or even bitter or angry about the way things shake out?
Of course you do. And when you work in government, your job is to provide advice. But whether they choose to take that advice or act on it is entirely their prerogative. But your job is to provide the advice. And so that should never change. You should also not be influenced by political pressure. And that's very difficult sometimes in a government system, and certainly when you work in threatened species where there's enormous pressure and stress and everything is almost an emergency. It's very important to remain clear, focused on what is best for conservation and for species recovery. Where the government picks up on that, and most of the time they don't, is out of your control. You can choose to go into the private sector, you can choose to rally or protest or riot, and all of those mechanisms do and are really important. But as a public servant, that's your role. So I don't regret the years that I had in government. In fact, they were foundational years for me, and I wouldn't have changed what I wrote or how I operated. I guess the frustration is that the slowness of the system to change means I've spent 30 years doing that, and now there's not another 30 years to creep forward. The rate of change is now so much faster. I don't have, either personally or professionally, another 30 years to try and change the system. So I need to be doing things far more smarter, far more proactively. I'm a little less careful about what I say. I really need to be a lot more alarmist, because particularly with 40-spotted Pardalote, I don't know that we do have another 30 years left for that species survival.
We're fellow travellers there, Sally. I love that you used that term that you picked out, emergency, because, I mean, we're on the bird emergency. That's exactly the way I felt and feel when I started off this little venture, in that I think you're quite right. The incremental losses that we've seen since the 70s and the 80s now snowballing, they're compounding. And the idea that, we've only lost 20% since the 70s. Now, if we lose 20% of not very many, all of a sudden the populations collapse and become non-viable. So, yeah, it's an emergency. And I'm glad you used that term, because I don't think enough people really see how dire it is. Anyway, there's my insertion of opinion for now, Sally. Let's talk about the 40 spot. How small do you think the population is now, and how does that compare to the last time that the recovery plan was published?
The last recovery plan was published had a lifespan between 2006 and 2010. We are now rewriting a new recovery plan grant, so we hope to hold some workshops maybe next month and get specialists involved and community input and have a new plan ready to go for the 40-spotted pardalote. But that in itself, demonstrates that there's huge lapses of time between viable plans and emerging new information. When we talk about how big is the population or how important is the population decline, I guess my perspective of working on this species since the 1990s and being handed the baton by Peter Brown, my boss, learning old school techniques like being out in the colonies, doing all of the monitoring and research by call, has given me a good perspective on the population 30, 20, 10 years ago and now today. And I know without any hesitation that the 40-spotted pardalote is dramatically declining. We had a population in the early 2000s of around 3,000 birds. That's a conservative estimate that Peter Brown and I would do the monitoring and come up with a population estimate, because working in threatened species, it's all about the numbers. It's all about the rate of decline, total population size. Everybody wants to know how many are left. And it's actually very hard to answer that. Particular species is stretched across a number of colonies and a number of locations. It's hard without a formal monitoring or survey program that's regularly undertaken to be able to answer that with confidence. So even though I give my opinion, there may be others out there that would choose to disagree. But my estimate of the population now is that it would be around 1,000 birds, maybe less, and that nowhere in any of the colonies, bar one on Bruny Island, has increased, has got bigger. They are all in decline.
So if I was talking about a company and we said that in the last 10 years, 15 years, said company has lost 75% of its value and does not have a clear strategy for improving its position, we'd be saying the board, the owners, and the managers must be hopeless. So you just mentioned that it's always about the numbers because that's what people can digest. But it's far more complex than that because it's all about the land holdings, the quality of the land, the stands of vegetation that are on the land. Before we go down that path, let's pretend I don't know what a 40-spotted pardalote is, what it looks like, and how it lives. Just a rundown. 40-spotted pardalotes for dummies.
Think small. Think fairly drab-coloured. Think of a bird that lives and spends all of its time high in the foliage of eucalypts, in the waving leaves and branches. Think of a bird that doesn't call that often, usually doesn't come low enough for you to see it, and that 99% of people won't be able to identify it or pick it up when they're in the bush. That's probably the 40-spotted pardalote. But on the other side of that description, it is a remarkable little bird. It is exquisite in appearance. It's tiny. We're talking 8 to 9 centimetres in size, weighs under 10 grams. It has evolved an intrinsic link to one eucalypt species. That's Eucalyptus viminalis, or white gum in Tasmania. On the mainland, it's often referred to as managum. And it's like a lot of threatened species, Grant. This is the Achilles heel when you're a specialist that relies on a source that's provided by one attribute in the environment. It is your weak point. And for 40-spotted pardalotes, that is the issue, and that is why they are in such decline. But I'll just mention why they're so amazing in the animal kingdom is that compared to other pardalote species, the 40-spotted pardalote, which of course is endemic to Tasmania only, has a small overhang on its beak, and it uses that overhang, tiny, to cut grooves in the branchlets and stems of white gum, and it's from that damaged groove that a small droplet of manna is produced that the bird relies on. So we have a species that farms its own food. And I think in the animal kingdom, that is a very rare, unique trait.
That's one thing that in some ways it frustrates me about the communications in conservation, that unique behaviour, and neither of us are behavioural scientists, but I imagine that it's quite significant. We know that crows are smart. We know that they can develop behaviours to earn food rewards. We're developing an understanding of cockatoos and ibis and brush turkey, learning and developing behaviours in urban settings, and everyone's talking about that. But we've got an agricultural specialist in the bird world here, and just that behaviour makes it an important species, in my view. What do you think?
I am biased, of course. It's an interesting conversation to be had because it takes me back to what we were saying earlier about government numbers. Yes, the 40 spot is unique, and in my mind it is the most important bird species that I'm now compelled to work for the rest of my life on. But is that what loving nature and caring for nature is all about? Is it to look for those points of difference? And when you work in threatened species, Grant, you realise that the only hooks you have to change developments, to reject proposals, to put in objections, relies on the little hooks in legislation, those points of difference. But are we in this dilemma today because we only look for those hooks? Yes, the 40 spot is absolutely unique in the animal kingdom and deserves to be out there having its story told and to compel people to say how important it is. But aren't all species in nature important? Isn't that what we have to change our mindset about? As a threatened species research scientist, I live in a property south of Hobart that's full of non-threatened species that every day I'm learning from, and they all have so much to teach us. And it's so difficult sometimes to always have to rely on a hook. And it reminds me of a conversation I had last night from a person who rang about a wind farm proposal in the northwest of Tassie, a woman that I had a terrific conversation with. I've never met her. And her words to me in her conversation, she said, I know it's wrong. I can see it's wrong. And yet she's compelled to find flaws in legislation or hooks in legislation to try and put in objection. And maybe there's some things that we need to change about how we deal with the environment.
One thing that always frustrates me is where we talk about development, where we always ascribe a number of jobs or a value to a project or some economic activity. But what do you think the impact would be on Tasmanian tourism, that sector, if the Swifty, the Pardalote and the OBP were no more, and that the habitat that they rely on has been denuded to the point that it's no longer special? It's not something that people from the mainland or for the rest of the world would come to see, especially to see. That's the point I make. They make a special trip. If everywhere is lovely rolling green hills and dairy farms, or suburbs containing large hardware barns and strip shopping malls, who's coming? So
that's a complex question, Grant, and there's a lot of layers on how you would respond to that. Tassie has a great influx of nature-based tourism. I would say that bird lovers and bird observers are a component of that, and they're attracted to Tassie by our endemics and the hopes of seeing some of those rare species, including 40 spots. And Bruny Island has been the focus of bird tours. But you forget Tassie has had major extinctions in the past. People don't come here and say, well, actually, I'm not going to go to Tassie because the thylacines extinct or the Tasmanian emu's gone. If we lose the scrub tit and the King Island thornbill off, I don't know that people will stop going to King Island. Nature-based tourism is all about scenes. It's about boutique food. It's about fresh air. It's about seeing bush. Knowing what's in that bush and how that bush is being managed is a whole level of complexity that I don't know. A lot of tourists go down that track. I don't know. They're very complex arguments, but certainly the money that is injected into an economy through nature-based tourism, if that or a portion of that could be directed towards species conservation or vegetation community conservation, wouldn't that start to open up a whole new conversation about why people come?
Yeah, that idea of communities, vegetation communities, and habitat generally, I think doesn't get pushed enough, because we are then passing from that discussion, we're talking about the numbers, aren't we? That there's this many native rats, there's this many possums, there's this many stems per hectare of this eucalypt, and we're assessing the quality of habitat by these whole lot of individual measurements. And while they're important, the intact habitat is infinitely more important than any one species component that dwells within it. And I think too often they're pulled apart rather than the discussion is had with the two elements at the forefront, if you can have two elements at the forefront. I guess one's always got to be in front of it.
Let's continue that thought using the 40-spotted pardalote, which is a great case study for all sorts of discussions. And habitat is a classic. 30 years ago, Grant, we in government that started the recovery program, we felt that habitat protection was the basic plank of the conservation of this species and its future survival. And we worked tirelessly we still are really, for 30 years to protect the colonies of 40-spotted pardalote. And we've been hugely successful. We've protected either in public or private conservation covenanted reserves about 90% of all known pardalote colonies. And those colonies are still there today. They still have trees, and there's still lines on the map saying those areas are protected. The quality of the habitat, because the environment is changing so rapidly, is now starting to diminish, and the health of the white gum and the deterioration in their capacity to produce high-quality manna is such that we now need to do far more. We need to be far more proactive. And if you have absolutely no funding, not a dollar, to try and spur that program forward, it's a huge ask. And that's why we now need to go down the track of a new recovery program. Everyone is volunteering their time. I left the TLC so I could spend, all of my time on the 40-spot program. That's why we need to reinvigorate and rethink and reimagine what we need to do for the future, because things are changing so rapidly.
And there's that element of complexity in environments, in habitats. I'm probably going to be using the terms incorrectly, but I think what we fail to talk about is that habitats are always in a process of succession, that when you have an edge effect, every time that something is cleared or new vegetation is introduced alongside a fence line or a new road is put in, it's a natural process that over time there's a noticeable change in that habitat. And each generation of people may not see that, but it can be evidenced in a number of ways. The seed bank, in all the sorts of analysis that can be done with leaf tissue and plant material of all sorts now. So it's not good enough just to have a static protection of a habitat. You need to be able to have new habitat being developed, being reinvigorated. Our habitats have adapted to fire and a whole lot of other things. And the 40 spot doesn't make it easy for itself because we haven't spoken about it, but it's fiercely territorial. So even if you have a stable colony, correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is if you have a colony which is successful and stable, it's continually driving the new recruits out and there's nowhere for them to go.
Yes, that is true, but I'll put a but in there. The colonies that have been protected are still there, and the reason we still have the species surviving today is because of that foundational work. But don't misunderstand, Grant. We also did a lot of work around corridors for movement, linking, so that we could grow habitat. But we now need to be shifting birds. We need to be shifting them to where white gum is healthier. We need to start new colonies, and translocation or supplementing with new stock is what we need to do. We need to be far more interventionist. We've had nest box program for the last 10 years that's now starting to give some really interesting data. We've got landholders erecting nest boxes and monitoring them. We've now got a monitoring program in place to look more closely at birds where they may be coming up in new areas. So you are correct. It is the basic life history and ecology of the pardalote that makes it tricky to work on it. And some might sit back and say, hey, you protected 90% of the known colonies. What more do you want? We want a lot more, because you don't just build a house and go and live in it and not expect to do maintenance. You don't just think that house is going to stay in place for the rest of your life without ever doing anything to it, or patching the eaves, or when the roof becomes loose or the walls start to crack or leak. There is so much work to be doing, and that's what I mean about the mindset of nothing is ever finished. You can't just breed orange-bellied parrots in captivity and keep pumping them out and think that's going to solve the problem. There's a lot of information, good information, that tells us the directions we need to go to make sure the 40 spot, which is very tenacious for a tiny bird, and pardalotes are a very tenacious and hardy group of birds. So we know what is needed to protect this species. We just need some resources and capacity to start doing it.
And in terms of a bird which is about the size of a computer mouse, but less fat, that's right. Yeah, certainly half the weight. But they're tiny things, but in their own sort of weight for age division, they're amazingly pugnacious.
Their tenaciousness, Grant, that is the reason they are still here today. And they are a survivor, and with a little bit of help and proactive work from us, they will continue to survive. But that's got to happen now, because they don't have 30 years to wait.
Imagine if they were the same size as a rainbow lorikeet. Could you imagine a cage match between a pardalote and a rainbow lorikeet? I reckon the bully boy lorikeet might have a match on his hands.
A lot of the monitoring sites that I do for 40 spots, Grant, are now full of rainbow lorikeet. It's such an invasive species in Tasmania. It has just dominated the southern areas and the sectors. It's on Bruny Island now. It's on the southeast of Tassie, all down Tinderbox Peninsula, Kingston House, picking it up on Maria. It's on Flinders Island. It is so successful. Those tracts are very dominating.
We probably need to talk about that in a different episode, because that puts different pressures on. I'm not sure whether it's the 40 spot, but certainly I would imagine that birds like the swift parrot could be driven out of prime habitat by, yeah. But let's talk about some of those particular aspects of conservation with the 40 spot that you talked about. Let's talk about nest boxes to start with. Nest box production, design, placement in the environment and monitoring. You touched on all of those. Can you tell us which bits are important, which bits have been successful, and what do you see will be growing in the future? Let's again look at the rainbow.
Well, nest boxes. Let's talk about nest boxes and 40 spots. We've really ramped up the nest box program for 40 spots. And in the early days, I have to admit, I never thought hollows would be a limiting factor for a tiny bird. Even with dieback or broken limbs on white gum or any eucalypts, I felt there were plenty of hollows for 40 spots, but that's not the case. And we have really proliferated the number of nest boxes that landholders now with protected colonies are establishing. The actual design is now well proven. The quality, we're spruiking that boxes have got to be the best quality, how they're attached, and then collecting the data. So that's a big thrust of our new recovery program, and that's what we're doing as volunteers. And I run workshops, and I particularly run workshops for land for wildlife property holders that are already conservation focused. The thing with 40 spots is you can put up nest boxes in potential habitat, but you really need them in existing colonies because that's how they expand. So you've got to get them used to using nest boxes. It can take some time. So people will often put up a nest box and say, "Wow, nothing's using my nest box." It's a real downer. But you've got to be patient. They're a great educational tool as well.
Can I ask you there, Sally, how long does a pardalote live? Like, what's the length of time of a generation, and do they need to learn to use nest boxes?
All of that, the learning is probably true, but if you put nest boxes in known colonies, and we've demonstrated this on Bruny Island, all of the original nest boxes were put in our most viable colonies, and it took a little while for the birds to take them up, but once they did take them up, then they rapidly increased in use because that was a learned behaviour, and juveniles that probably fledged from boxes would have been more likely to breed in boxes. But it's only more recently that we've had banding work through nest box installation that we have learned so much more. And in terms of longevity, some of the early banding work in the early suggested that 40 spots could live somewhere between 12 and 20 years, which is a really long time for a small bird. So that's several generations. They're quite hardy and stable, but it hasn't been until quite recently that we've had any returns on bands or been able to get any idea of longevity. Once juveniles disperse, they may not come back to the natal colony, so they can be very hard to pick up, and even seeing them with a leg band is tricky given their size.
Something I wanted to ask you as a result of what you told us then, the monitoring of boxes. Is that monitoring, the placement of boxes and the ongoing monitoring, perhaps the most expensive part of the conservation effort, apart from land purchases? But not just anybody can get high up in a tree and hang a box and then collect data. So is that a limiting factor in the ongoing conservation efforts? Like, what sort of proportion of a budget would that be? Because it always comes down to dollars. We've got to talk about the numbers of the population, but then there's that management of the population, which is a limiting factor for decision makers, I imagine. So,
well, we can talk about the dollars because that's a very short conversation. There isn't any funding.
There's no money. Okay.
But you can actually do with nothing for a short amount of time. It's not sustainable. My energy is wearing thin. But in terms of boxes, Grant, Bruny Island is a terrific example of the men's shed that build boxes and supply them to the Bruny Island Environmental Network. Landholders pay a small amount for a box, but you're right, it's a specialist skill to install the box. We run workshops, and there have been small grants to employ arborists and professional tree climbers to put boxes up for landholders, often an extension ladder to cut it. We don't want any other deaths while we're trying to save this species. So you're right. when you don't have money and you don't have funding, it's hugely problematic. Nest boxes are but one tool, as I said before, and I haven't really mentioned the perilous state of birds on flinders. We need actions to be restocking. So we need a translocation plan. We need project staff. We need to be consolidating data and getting information out there. We need the whole recovery program to be ticking along as a well-oiled machine. But it's hugely difficult when you're relying on volunteers who give so valiantly and freely of their time and expertise. You also need money, and that's firmly on my radar for this year.
The volunteers needed highly skilled, and certainly the tree climbers and arborists in high demand doing other jobs. So it's asking a lot for somebody to be involved in the program, because hanging the box is only the first part of the story, isn't it? You need to be collecting the data to keep learning, and then you need to be doing pest control and things like that if required. So it's not like someone can...
to land is all about, though. And isn't that a fundamental part of the success of the Land for Wildlife programs? You've got people that live on the land, that care about the land and are willing to do what is needed to look after those species. So covenanted properties on private land and Land for Wildlife program gives you a repository of people that are already on board and willing to assist. Now, that's not saying they don't need some financial assistance. If we had financial assistance to help, it would be even better, but at least we do have some basic actions.
And it's amazing that so many people are always involved, but it highlights one of the problems that is developing in government, in societies like ours, in all walks of life. We are now, even though the tax take continues to increase, the reliance on volunteers in all areas of service delivery is growing. So you've got to think that the government is actually being less effective with a greater take of the money, which...
Well, two of my observations in recent times, Grant, and that is the stigma surrounding the word retired and volunteer. And there's a lot of negativity because, actually I should have also mentioned citizen science. There's three elements there that carry a lot of stigma. If you're a volunteer, it's almost like you're giving freely of your time, but it's a job that paid professionals really haven't got time to do it. Therefore, it's a diminished job. If you're retired, then somehow you have the crocheted rug and you're brain dead and you really haven't got much to contribute. That's another myth. And citizen science, the growth in data collection and citizen science. And I use nest boxes on private land, but also our monitoring program and the collation of data that comes from using motion sensor cameras. It is long overdue where we have not been engaging people in collecting data because it's sat in the realm of professional science that have guarded data and not shared data because they need to publish scientific papers or research reports, and I was one of them. Now, data collection and the simplicity of making sure that information is given and handed out and used to the best of species conservation. Three areas that we really need to be ramping up and change the stigma surrounding them.
Sally, if you've listened to any of the shows already, you know that I'm a great lover of citizen science. I think what Claire's been building up there is terrific, and there's the bird count. Canada have just had theirs. New Zealand have had one. India. It's so good that the data is being collected and that is being shared widely, and that new people are getting involved in ongoing conservation efforts, and they can look back and see the story, and they can see whether it's a good story or a not so good story and what needs to change. So that's a key plank of conservation. But at the same time, it's a double-edged sword, because the more volunteers you have and the more citizen scientists you have, the more government says, what do we need to pay for anything for?
So what's the answer to that, Grant? Do we do nothing? and then blame the government when a species goes extinct because they didn't give us any money.
No. We do what we're doing now. We get mad as hell. We do what we can. And, yeah.
It does open up a conversation if I just butt in there again, and I'm conscious that we've probably outrun our time. But the instability of funding has been another disaster in the conservation sector. Most people working on short-term contracts, research programs in academic institutions that don't go beyond 2 or 3 years. That lack of certainty and stability in funding is a curse, and you can't survive any long-term program without secure funding. You can't run a business without that. And I mentioned the TLC and the way it generates its own money through innovative business programs and its economic model. We need to really shift the way we fund conservation in Australia. Maybe we need a foundation fund that sits outside of, that is contributed to by the population, that provides a bucket of money that can grow through business investment, but fund programs as well in a long-term fashion. There's a lot of these conversations. They're not new. They haven't had traction, but it doesn't mean they're not good.
I think people don't understand how little money is spent on conservation and how little money it would take to actually make a big difference. Now, I'm working off memory, but I think in the recovery plan that you largely put together, Sally, the actions that were required to, as was known and when the recovery plan for the 40 spot was put together, was going to cost something like $270,000 a year. That's 2.5 wages for a junior accountant. So that's less than the cost that it takes to, well, probably less than the cost that it takes to operate a milk bar, the corner milk bar. When you look at it like that, we have obligations under legislation to do the protection. But you've just told us, Sally, there is no money for the placement of nest boxes which work, and there's no money from the government to buy habitat and protect it. Now, I don't know how many hectares you could buy for $270,000 a year, but I'm imagining you could probably expand it by 10 or 15 hectares annually. I don't know. But that's a lot of seedlings that could be bought. That's a lot of revegetation that could be done on denuded land that adjoins good habitat.
Grant, project officers are key to running programs. In the early days of the Tasmanian government, there were really, not the early days, in the 20s and until recently, there's really only been funding for devil, orange-bellied parrot, and early on we had fox money, but 90% of everything else gets nothing. You've got those key drivers, and I'm certainly not suggesting that the money that goes towards the orange-bellied is not well deserved. In fact, more. The more you throw at the orange-bellied parrot, the more you need. And it's typical of, if you've got a well-run program that's achieving results, it does cost money. And I don't know why we don't fund some of those recovery actions, because with 40 spot, Grant, a lot of the land protection and colony protection that we've achieved for one species also protects swift parrot. All of the land protected on Bruny Island, most of it is full of blue gum, protects swift parrot. It's not just a single species recovery program. There's a lot of dual benefits.
What frustrates me a little bit, Sally, when we talk about the sort of higher level conservation efforts needed, is that we don't have champions in the administrative and the political stratas. We don't see anyone coming out and saying, I'm like, who's the politician who is the champion of the 40 spot or the swift parrot? But there'd be plenty of them willing to say, I helped save the bilby or the numbat, or I'm sure there'll be people jumping on board saying, without me, we probably might not have saved the Tasmanian devil from the face tumour. I don't know, why is it that so few people are prepared to, in that strata of society, are prepared to hitch themselves to an icon species for an island state?
They will in the future, Grant. They will. It's evolving. And as I said, we need a whole cultural shift and mindset in how we look at conservation and how we value nature and the environment. And to me, it's an absolute no-brainer. It's fundamental to the way I live. It brings great joy living close to species, seeing nature unfold in your backyard, knowing that you're doing good, knowing that you're protecting. I don't understand why it's not a fundamental plank of how we live in Tasmania, and yet the disconnect is enormous. Yes, I want money for 40-spotted Pardalote. I'm thinking of all those shorebirds who are going to hit the wind turbines on robins. I'm thinking of the shorebirds that are trying to nest on the beaches when people and dogs and horses and big four-wheel drives and road bikes and are going up and down sandy beaches. And I'm thinking, it's huge. It is huge. But it's a mindset shift. And unfortunately, it's going to take more extinctions. It's going to take the loss of habitats, or it's going to take people like me to put our hand up and say, we lost the battle. I'm going to just withdraw from conservation work and just open another bottle of champagne and enjoy the years I've got left and not have it as a huge weight on my mind.
No, we're not giving up yet. Look, I'm always reminded of that scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I feel like the conservation warriors with a public profile are like the knight who is saying, it's only a flesh wound. It's one arm goes off and one arm goes off and then the leg goes off. But hopefully with the advances in surgery, the knight can get up and walk away these days. And hopefully we're going to get to the stage where enough of the community informed enough that they're also on board. Because that issue you talked about with beaches and horses and four-wheel drives and dogs, most of those people would probably be sympathetic if they had any idea of the damage that is being done. The powers that be, like the Conservation Department, for want of the correct term, they're not telling people what is on the beach and what needs to be looked out for, because they probably don't have the money for the signage, and they certainly don't have the money for a ranger, an educational communication ranger, to be on the beach on Saturdays and Sundays when the recreational tourists are around to talk to them, because over time.
Soft options, didn't we? Started with the soft options of education, which takes generations to filter through. You don't need signage. Just signage, the proliferation of signage. Who reads that stuff?
But that's my point.
Read it are the ones that already know the message. Yeah. Do we need more brochures? It's never been easier, Grant, to the web. There is so much information out there.
It really is that if they invested in people like you, and like your fellow travellers who have the knowledge and the experience, to actually pay them to be out there on weekends talking to people and saying, hey, this is a prime nesting spot for hoodies. But the last thing anyone's ever going to pay for is people, because it's expensive. It's harder. It's harder than putting up a sign.
How interesting is that? I remember when COVID hit, Grant, it's almost as if the government were printing money from everywhere. Where did that money?
But that's the point, is that we don't see the value in the environment around us unless we can directly tie that spot of ground and that activity that happens on it to a specific economic outcome. We're not looking holistically, and I think that's really the point.
It's a flaw in the human species, isn't it? Because greed and driven by economics, not understanding what sustainable means or putting any of those points into practice. It's a flaw in the human psyche, and it's causing our own demise, really, isn't it?
Yeah, but we get pretty lazy too, in that we like to think that it's for somebody else to do the job. And no, I'm sorry, if you're listening or you're watching, it's your bloody job to save the species. It's not Sally's job. Sally's done her job for 30 years. Kat Young is doing her job now. The people organising the festivals on King Island and Bruny Island, are doing their jobs. They've been doing their jobs. Now it's your bloody time to do your job and agitate, get involved, educate yourself, write a letter. If you're angry about it, do something. Don't be one of these dickheads who 15 years down the track goes, gee, I wish someone did something about the swift parrot. Oh, I wish I had it. Or be one of those bird watchers who goes, oh, I wish I saw a swift parrot before they were gone. Don't just wish it. Write a bloody letter. Go to a meeting. Go to a protest. Paint a sign on the side of a building. I don't know. Do something, because it's really nice that you care, but do something. There we are. This message was written and authorised. Sally, what have I missed in our discussion about 40 spots that we really need to take on? I'm really interested in Bruny Island in that it's the largest population still of 40 spots, intact population.
Maria Island is, so between Maria and Bruny, Grant, that's 99% of the population.
And in some of the material I was reading, 1/3 of the population of swift parrots relies on Bruny Island. Would that be still correct?
Yeah, certainly Bruny is a repository for swifties. You know, the difficulty with swifties is they follow the flowering eucalypt. So unlike 40 spots that are relatively sedentary, particularly through the breeding season, swifties are only there when it's flowering.
Yeah.
Those permanent reserves are a good basis to the conservation, but really you don't need lines on a map. You just need to protect and not cut down old trees.
And, of course, swift parrots follow the blossoms, as you said, which means they migrate to the mainland where they need the box woodland habitats and those flowering eucalypts. And, of course, we're cutting them down, clearing the land at a rate of knots on the mainland, which means that they might have a successful breeding season in Tasmania, where you guys might be doing the right thing on maintaining those island strongholds, and then they come up here and they starve. So good job, people.
There's another recovery action that we could be looking at with both swifties and 40 spots, and that's supplementary feeding. And it pains me to say that, but we need to become more interventionist. And with 40 spots, we've now looked at the chemical composition of manna, so we can recreate an artificial formula to mimic the manna and what it provides during the breeding season. So we could do some supplementary feeding, because if white gum are not producing enough food due to their own poor health, we can maybe start to assist that threat and try and reduce that threat, I should say.
Well, there's probably a whole lot more that we could talk about with those ongoing efforts, I think, Sally. But I just want to ask you about a couple of the other threats to all of the birds we've been talking about. Let's talk about cats. What's the situation with cats in those stronghold areas of, let's include those two species, the 40 spots and the swifties?
Feral cats, or even domestic cats, are a huge problem on Tasmania's native species. But for 40 spots, Grant, they're not a big threat, and that is purely because 40 spots and most pardalotes are foliage gleaners, and they nest high above the ground, and they live most of the time foraging in canopies of eucalypts. So it's not an easy spot for cats to predate them. But that doesn't diminish the conversation that should be had about getting rid of feral cats from the environment, because their impact is hugely significant on small mammals and other bird species that do nest close to the ground.
While I was trawling through all the information on the ABC, has been really supportive of getting the message out over the years for Tasmanian birds. But possums and sugar gliders came up often, discussion points for being threats to nestlings. Now, I know that it's not so much with the 40 spot, but is predation by other native animals that doesn't seem to be a part of the normal run of things, is that still a problem for, let's say swifties particularly?
My understanding of the swift parrots is that motion sensor cameras have definitely picked up the huge competition and predation by sugar gliders, which were introduced to Tasmania. We've got good evidence that demonstrates sugar gliders were brought in the early days of European colonisation. That's well and truly been confirmed. The difference with 40 spots is, again, I mentioned that they breed often in small diameter holes, which are too small for sugar gliders. It's likely that they can predate on any nestlings, not just swift parrots or 40 spots, but they're very gregarious and predatory little possum sugar gliders. So whatever cavity they can get into, they'll turf out what is there. Brush-tailed possums is a different conversation. Brush-tails are a whole different competitor in the landscape. They're hugely successful, very smart. Yes, they predate nestlings and chicks, but it's not the major part of their diet. And so, again, I don't have camera evidence that demonstrates that brush-tailed possums have had a major impact. 40-spotted pardalote. We could mention that 40 spots have a parasitic fly that infests nestlings and causes the death of nestlings, and that's been confirmed now using nest boxes with cameras and checking. So as the temperature increases and fly strike increases on pardalote chicks, that is an increasing threat that needs to be looked at, and there's some very innovative research underway with feather dispensers and looking at disinfecting the use of the interiors of nest boxes to prevent or reduce fly strike. There's a lot of gaps to be filled in, and we've got great technology now. We've got scopes, we've got motion sensor cameras, we've got nest boxes that can be checked and birds banded and videoed. So we are learning a lot more about those intimate.
There's so many more things to talk about, Kate. I'm really interested in the idea of disinfecting the nest boxes while they're being populated. That's a big step, isn't it? That's a really big step. Costly too, I would imagine, per box. So then we should be putting a value on each nestling.
Yep. And you could convert that into the tourism industry. How many bird watchers come here to see our endemics? What economic value does that bring into the state, and how much per bird would that be? You can do all of that.
We do need to do that, and perhaps we can have another discussion about that when we've done a bit more homework about maybe the methods that could be used, because I think there's a range of different ways that it could be done. Then we'd have to see who would accept it. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Pardalote credits. I like that. I like that. Yeah. Sally, are you optimistic about the next, let's give it a 10-year window for the endemic Tasmanian threatened species?
Tassie has some good stuff going for it. We've got a terrific reserve system. We've got good private land reserves. We've got a growing conservation landholder community. That gives me hope. But what we have is a changing climate, which will bring with it a whole new range of threats, including more severe fire. And when you're working on an island-based species, Flinders, Maria, Bruni, we're hanging on a fine thread in case of a wildfire. And I think the example of Kangaroo Island fire and other fires around Australia has demonstrated how easily you can lose a significant portion of your population. And that's why being proactive now is so important, dispersing birds, establishing new colonies, defraying the risk in case of stochastic events. All of those actions are so important. Ask me in 10 years, Grant, and it'll be interesting to know how our birds are faring. Not many, in my understanding, are actually going up in number. Some of the problem species are, but not many of our native birds. Certainly the monitoring by BirdLife Tas that's been spearheaded by Mike Newman is showing rapid decline in species that we thought were common and widespread. So it's not a story that's unique to Tasmania. It's a story that's been demonstrated in the Bird Action Plan, and it's a story that's unfolding across the whole of our country.
And that's actually the origin story of the bird emergency, Sally, is that I just noticed around me that the birds that used to be common just around me were no longer common, that hearing a butcherbird was a rarity. Hopefully we'll be able to say that there was some arrest in the decline in 10 years' time when we do have this conversation again and we're all smiles. Now, Sally, I always run my guests through a standard series of questions. Buckle up, get ready, and let's go with the bird emergency questions. I don't do them in any particular order. So let's start with, what's your favourite bird? Start with a hard.
Can I have two?
You can have.
And Tasmanian native hen. I love native hens. Fabulous species. I have two.
The native hen declining in numbers rapidly, or no? Good. So there's a good news story. One of your favourite birds is not in decline. What's your bucket list bird?
One I've already ticked or one I need to tick?
Look, you can have one. You can have one of each.
Cuddling a kakapo when I did some research in New Zealand was pretty fabulous. I still remember holding Smoko when he needed his harness changed to put a new data logger on and feeling his belly was like a bowl of jelly. Wow, what a species. Flamingos. I'd really like to see some pink flamingos in the wild. I have seen some in Sri Lanka, but they were in a distant heat haze. So give me some pink flamingos for my future tick list.
Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? And what's your favourite bird watching location?
My backyard.
Your backyard?
My backyard on the slopes of Kunani, Mount Wellington.
What makes it so congenial to bird watching?
I really don't even need to watch. If the windows or doors are open, the bird coming in. It's a corridor for movement. It is just a symphony of bird sound. There's always action. It's always alive with birds, and it is just a joy to live in an environment where you've got birds coming and going and giving you a little touch along most of the time.
Have you got a couple of regular friends in your garden that you...
Grey shrike thrush that have bred under my veranda, and I've set cameras on them. Learned a lot, actually, about grey shrike thrush breeding. I've had spotteds breeding in the bank this year. I've got native hens breeding in my little dam. Grey goshawks regularly come and perch and whip off the native hen chicks without me looking. Lots of green rosellas, wedgies, brown falcons. I've got a monitoring site here on the Bird Data app, and if I can't get 25 20-minute count, something's wrong.
Gee, sounds like doing a couple of laps of your backyard would get you a pretty high score on bird a minute. Are you up on bird a minute yet, Sally?
No, I'm not, and I don't use eBird either. I really love the sound. All of my work is done by call. Just chill out and let it ooze in through the ears and into the brain and into the heart.
That's almost the next question. Are you a ticker or a flicker? I think you're probably both, aren't you? You're ticking off your list, but you're also an experiential bird watcher.
I did an organised bird trip to Sri Lanka a couple of years ago with a good friend of mine. It's the first bird tour that I've been on, and it was an amazing learning experience. I'll never do another one because the rate of seeing new birds was phenomenal. It was both an incredible experience but a horror, because that's not what I find fulfills my need to see birds. I can see common species. I just need a glimpse of something now and again, or to hear something. So I guess I'm like most bird lovers. I love to see new species, but I love an intimate moment and time to reflect and understand what it is I'm looking at and what I need to remember from that moment.
And what's your bucket list location for going bird?
Oh, I've been lucky, and I'm a bit of an island junkie. Try to get 3 islands in a year. I've done a lot of islands around Australia, including the Paradise Islands, Lord Howe, Norfolk, been to Christmas Island, but a lot of islands in Tasmania that most people wouldn't get to, a lot of remote islands, but also a little bit of work in New Guinea. That was pretty special. Sri Lanka, birding in Bhutan was really terrific. We've been to Nepal, birded there. I've got a lot to see, a lot to go. Europe, birded all through England and Scotland, and I'd love to go to Africa. There's so much. But I love to see all the world. There's so much learning, Grant. I'm no different to most people. Travel, new experiences, and just an occasional new sighting is what drive.
I think what that tells us is that you're going to need a very big bucket.
Seeing peacock in India was a big tick, as we were chatting about before we started. They are simply stunning when they display it. Yeah, that's just such a heart stopper. So every moment, birds are just a total joy. How everybody on the planet doesn't love and engage with birds is beyond me.
They're weirdos, the ones that don't. Kate, I've done it again. Why am I doing that? I've done it again. You're going to have to really kick my bum when I do get down there, Sally. What's your favourite piece of kit when you're out in the field?
Binoculars, I have to say that. The only thing I need in the field are my ears, really. I just need to hear. I've got a lot better over the years at processing sound. In fact, you never turn your ears off. They're always open. So hearing birds, frogs, hearing the sound of nature is actually fundamental to my research work. It's been fundamental to the work I've done at the TLC. So I'm not very big on equipment. I don't carry scopes. I've got a nice little pair of binoculars. When we're doing monitoring for 40 spots, we do a little bit of... So I've got a little Bluetooth speaker. But no, I'm not a gear junkie. I don't actually have anything. Just a little old bag with a few rips in the bottom and my bins and my ears, and I'm really low maintenance, cheap to take out, actually. I'll be looking forward to your invitation when you're down here, Grant.
I'm looking forward to coming down. I'm like everyone, I think, at this time of very reluctant to go too far from home at the moment because you never know what will happen and what the consequences of travel might be at this point in time. But, Sally, here's the controversial question. What's your field guide of choice?
I get asked to take a lot of people out now to see 40 spots. It's constant because they want to tick them off their list. And what I find is as soon as we go out, they're using their phones with apps and they're using Morecambe. They're playing bird calls. What was that, Sally? And I'll go to tell them and they'll be looking for the call. So I've got a very old version of Slater. It's a little slim green volume. Sits in the pocket of my backpack. That's what I use. I write in it. I use it as a notebook. It's well out of date, but if I want to check on taxonomy or anything newer, the old days I would have used Hansab, but now there's so much information available. That's the one. I love that. It's got an easy index in the back. So that's my field guide of choice. I don't know that I'm going to get a lot of ticks from younger people on that version.
Let's reminisce a little bit there, Sally. Did you have the part 1 and part 2 of the previous Peter Slater guide?
No, I didn't. I've only ever had one. I did have a lovely field guide that one of my partners gave me. But when we split up, I put that in a plastic bag and put it in a cupboard. So I haven't used that since. So I started a new one with Slater.
Can't bear to handle it anymore. Sally, it's been great to meet you and get to know the body of your work. I think we'll place you firmly in the middle of the bird emergency Twitcher birdwatcher spectrum. That you're experiential, but you are maintaining a list. Do you know your life number?
No, I don't.
There we are. That means you're certainly not up the extreme end of the spectrum. It's not very common that someone has their life number to hand. I haven't got a clue what mine is.
I used to troll through the field guides and memorise names, species names, Latin names, what they were. I put in all that effort years ago. Particularly young people, I really, if they get right into list and ticking and because it focuses them right in on birds and they're starting to look for detail and looking for points of differences. I think that's a good thing, but it's not what drives me anymore.
No, I think it's a beautiful story hearing what everybody likes and looks for as part of their hobby. For some of us, it's far more than a hobby. And I always envy people like yourself, Sally, who have been able to build a career being involved with nature. I think you're very lucky people.
Very privileged, Grant. Yeah. And it's still going. More to come.
That's right. Really a connection to nature and to the wildlife and the birds around us should never really end, should it? Should only end one way, and that's when it all ends. So there we are, a touch of morbidity, but a sense of joy as well. Sally, thanks so much for being my guest on the Bird Emergency, and I really hope that our listeners and our viewers have got to know you and are far more curious and engaged about the amazing avifauna of Tasmania, especially the 40-spot. Be the friend of the 40-spotted pardalote, everybody. Thanks. See you next time.